The days that followed Harold's visit were quiet, but Clara could feel a shift inside herself. It was as though a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. She had made a decision, and though it had been hard, she knew deep down that she had chosen the right path. She had chosen James. She had chosen a life that felt real and grounded in mutual respect and love. James didn't push her to talk about Harold's visit. He could tell something had changed in Clara, but he respected her space. They continued to work together on the ranch side by side, finding comfort in the routines they had begun to build. The days were long and the work was hard, but there was something deeply fulfilling in the simplicity of it all. They were partners in every sense of the word, sharing both the work and the rewards. Clara felt a deep sense of gratitude for James. He had never asked her to be anything other than herself. When she had arrived at the ranch, she had been uncertain, carrying the weight of her past and the hurt from Harold's rejection. But now with each passing day, she felt like she was shedding that old skin. She was no longer just the poor girl from a small village. She was Clara, a woman with a future that was being built right in front of her eyes. The love between them grew slowly but steadily. There were no grand gestures or dramatic confessions. Instead, their bond was formed in the quiet moments, shared looks across the dinner table, working together in the fields, walking side by side under the vast, starry sky. There was no rush. James understood that love wasn't something you could force or hurry. It was something that grew naturally, with time and patience. As the weeks passed, Clara became more and more involved in the work on the ranch. She had always been a hard worker, but here, she found a sense of purpose in every task. Whether it was helping to care for the animals, tending the crops, or fixing the fences, Clara felt like she was contributing to something important. The land wasn't easy to work, but it had a rhythm to it that felt satisfying. Every small victory, fixing a broken fence or harvesting a crop, felt like a step forward. A step toward building the life she had always dreamed of. One morning, after a long day of working in the fields, Clara sat on the porch watching the sun begin to set. The sky was painted with shades of orange and pink, and the air was cool and quiet. James came up beside her, his work clothes dusty from the day's labor. He sat down next to her, and for a moment they just sat there in silence, watching the world around them. "You know," James said softly, breaking the silence, when I first inherited this ranch, I never imagined it would be like this. I thought I was going to be alone forever, just working the land and never having anyone to share it with." He paused for a moment, as if weighing his words. "But now with you here, I can see that everything I've worked for is starting to come together." Clara smiled, her heart swelling with affection for him. "I think it's the same for me," she said quietly. "I never thought I'd find a place like this, where I could be myself and build a future with someone I trust. You've shown me that it's possible to have a life that's real, where love isn't about what you can give, but about sharing everything, good times and hard times together." James looked at her then, his blue eyes full of sincerity. "I don't want to rush anything," he said, his voice steady, "but I know that I want you to be here with me for good. I want you to be a part of this life, not just for now, but for always." Clara's heart fluttered in her chest. She had known that this was where her future lay, but hearing James say it out loud filled her with warmth and certainty. He had never pressured her, never tried to force anything. He had simply let her be herself, and that had been enough for both of them. "I want that too, James," she said softly, her voice full of emotion. "I want to be here with you, building this life every single day." James reached over and took her hand, his touch gentle but firm. In that moment, Clara knew that her life had truly changed. She wasn't just living for the day anymore. She was living for a future that she and James were going to create together. Their life on the ranch became even more fulfilling as the months passed. They worked hard, but there was joy in the work, and there was love in the small moments. They grew closer with each passing day, learning about each other's dreams, fears, and hopes for the future. Clara began to understand that love wasn't about grand gestures or fairy tale endings. It was about the everyday moments that made life meaningful. It was about trust, partnership, and the willingness to face the challenges of life together. As they worked side by side, James often spoke of his hopes for the future. He talked about expanding the ranch, about building a family, and about growing old with someone who would always be there. Clara listened to him, her heart swelling with affection for this man who had never judged her, who had seen her as an equal, and who had always treated her with respect. She knew that she wanted the same things. One evening, after a particularly long day of work, James took Clara by the hand and led her out to the field. The sun had just set, casting a soft golden light over everything. The world felt quiet, peaceful, as though time had slowed down just for them. James turned to Clara, his eyes full of tenderness. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice soft. "I want us to build something together, something lasting. I want to spend the rest of my life with you, Clara. Will you marry me?" Clara's breath caught in her throat. She had known this moment was coming, but hearing him say it out loud made her heart race with joy. Without a second thought, she nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "Yes," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, I will marry you." James smiled, his face lighting up with happiness, and he pulled her into a warm embrace. In that moment, Clara felt like the luckiest woman in the world. She had found her place, her home, and the person who would stand by her side through everything. She had found the love she had always dreamed of, a love built on respect, hard work, and trust. As they stood together in the field, Clara realized that she had finally found the life she had always wanted. It wasn't the life of luxury or wealth that she had once imagined, but it was a life that was richer in ways that mattered. It was a life built on love, on partnership, and on the quiet moments that made everything worthwhile. Together, Clara and James would face whatever the future held. The road ahead wouldn't always be easy, but with each other they knew they could handle whatever came their way. Their future was a blank page ready to be written, and Clara couldn't wait to begin the next chapter of their story. Together. Clara's days on the ranch seemed to pass by in a blur of hard work, peaceful moments, and growing connection. As she helped James with his daily chores, she learned more about him and the life he had built for himself. He was kind, steady, and never once treated her as less than his equal. They worked side by side, whether it was fixing fences, tending to the animals, or preparing meals together. There was no rush, no pressure. Everything was done with patience and care, and it felt like their bond grew stronger with each passing day. But despite the quiet comfort of life on the ranch, Clara couldn't help but think about the life she had left behind. There was a part of her that was still unsure, a part that wondered if she had made the right choice in leaving her old life behind. She had come so far, taken a leap of faith in coming to James, but what if she had made a mistake? What if, somewhere deep inside her, she was still waiting for Harold? James never rushed her to make any decision. He didn't push her to settle or to promise anything she wasn't ready for. He had always made it clear that their relationship, if it were to grow, would be based on mutual respect. And he had treated her with that respect every single day. But Clara's thoughts often wandered back to Harold, and she found herself thinking about him more than she wanted to. She remembered the first time she had read Harold's letters. They had been filled with promise, with hope for a better future together. At first, everything had seemed perfect. But then his rejection had come like a cold wind, and Clara had been left in the dust, heartbroken. Too poor was what he had said, and though she had tried to move past those words, they had stuck with her, following her as she walked through each day on the ranch. Now, as she worked with James, she felt a different kind of hope growing inside her. The life she was building with him wasn't perfect, but it felt real. The way James spoke of the future wasn't about fancy houses or wealth. It was about creating something lasting with hard work and love. He wanted a partnership, not just a marriage for the sake of convenience. He saw Clara for who she was, and he appreciated her for it. In all of James's words and actions, Clara began to see the kind of love that was built on a strong foundation of respect, not material wealth. But Clara's heart remained torn. She didn't want to hurt James, but she couldn't ignore the feelings that were bubbling up inside her. What if Harold had made a mistake? What if, by accepting James's invitation, she had turned away from a chance at something with Harold? She tried to quiet these thoughts, but they lingered, stubborn and unyielding. One day, while Clara was working in the kitchen preparing a simple meal for the two of them, she heard a knock on the door. It was an unexpected visitor, and when she opened the door, her breath caught in her throat. Standing there, looking just as she remembered, was Harold. The moment she saw him, a flood of emotions rushed over her: surprise, confusion, and even a little anger. But there was also a sense of curiosity. Why had he come? What did he want now after everything that had happened? Harold seemed just as surprised to see her. He was dressed in sturdy clothes, clearly having traveled a long distance to get there. His expression was serious, but there was something else there too. Something that Clara couldn't quite place. "I didn't expect to find you here," Harold said, his voice softer than Clara remembered. "I've thought about you often, Clara, more than I thought I would." Clara stood in the doorway, trying to process the moment. Her heart was racing and she didn't know what to say. She had imagined this moment 1,000 times in her head, but now that it was real, she didn't know how to react. She had spent so much time thinking about Harold, about what might have been, but now she wasn't sure if she could even go back to that place. "I've come to apologize," Harold continued, his voice sincere but hesitant. "I was wrong to reject you the way I did. I judged you based on things that didn't matter. You're not too poor, Clara. You're more than that. I should have seen that." Clara swallowed hard, trying to hold back the flood of emotions threatening to overtake her. She had been waiting for this moment in a way, wanting Harold to admit he had been wrong. But now that it was happening, she wasn't sure what it meant. She had moved on, or so she thought. She had built something new with James and everything had seemed so right with him. Yet here stood Harold, asking for forgiveness, offering her words that had been missing before. "I'm sorry for what I said," Harold repeated, his eyes looking deep into hers. "I want to make things right. I've come to ask for another chance, Clara, if you'll have me." Clara felt her heart skip a beat. She had been so sure of her decision to come to James, to build a life with him. But now, standing in front of Harold, she felt that familiar pull. The past was calling to her, and it was hard to ignore. I don't know what to say," Clara said quietly. "You hurt me, Harold. I don't know if I can just forget that." Harold nodded, understanding her hesitation. "I know I can't undo what I've done. I just wanted to tell you that I've learned from my mistakes. I want to be a better man, and I want you to know that if you'll have me, I do everything I can to make things right between us." Clara stood there for a long moment, caught between the past and the future. She thought of James, the man who had never judged her, who had treated her with respect from the very beginning. She thought about how far they had come together, how their lives were slowly intertwining with each passing day. James had never expected her to be anything other than who she was. He had never asked her to change, only to be with him and build a life together. And yet Harold's words held weight. He was offering her a second chance, something that many people never got. But Clara knew deep down that the decision wasn't about Harold's offer. It was about her. "I can't just go back to how things were," Clara said finally, her voice firm. "I've learned too much. I've found a place where I can be myself, where I don't have to prove anything. James and I have something real, Harold, and I can't turn my back on that." Harold's face fell, but he didn't argue. He had come seeking forgiveness, but he knew deep down that he had no right to ask for it. He had let Clara go once, and now he had to accept that she had moved on. "I understand," he said quietly. "I'm sorry, Clara, I truly am. I wish you the best." With that, Harold turned and walked away, leaving Clara standing in the doorway, watching him go. As he disappeared from view, Clara felt a sense of peace settle over her. She had made her choice. She had chosen to build a life with James, and that was where her heart truly belonged. Clara's heart raced as she made the decision to travel to James's ranch. She had written to him, and he had responded with kindness, inviting her to come and see the life he had described so carefully in his letters. Clara had always dreamed of a life like the one James spoke of, a life filled with honesty, hard work, and the promise of a future that could be built together. Now it felt like she was standing on the edge of a new world, one she had never dared to imagine before. It wasn't an easy decision to make. She had spent so many months thinking about Harold and wondering what might have been if things had gone differently. Even though she knew in her heart that Harold had not treated her the way she deserved, his rejection still lingered in her mind. She couldn't just forget about it. Every time she thought about Harold's letter, his words haunted her. Too poor for the life he wanted. Clara had always known that she wasn't rich, but those words made her feel like she was worth less than others. They made her feel invisible. But now James was offering her a chance at something real, something that could be built on mutual respect. His letter had been filled with sincerity, and it felt different from anything she had ever experienced. James didn't care about her background or her wealth. He simply saw her as a woman with dreams and hopes just like him. For the first time in a long while, Clara felt as though someone truly understood her, and that gave her the strength to leave behind the shadow of Harold's rejection. When the day finally arrived for Clara to leave her family and travel to meet James, a mix of excitement and nerves stirred inside her. Her mother gave her a tight hug and whispered, "Be safe, my dear. Whatever happens, remember we love you." Clara tried to smile, but there was a small knot in her stomach. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew she was ready to take the step. She had been carrying the weight of her dreams alone for so long, and now, at last, she had the chance to make those dreams a reality. The journey to James's ranch wasn't easy. Clara had to travel for several days, riding in a wagon over rough roads with the wind biting at her face and the sun beating down on her back. Every bump in the road made her heart pound a little faster, but she pressed on. The thought of meeting James kept her going. She had no idea what he would be like in person. Would he be the same kind, thoughtful man that his letters had shown, or would he be different once they met face to face? When she finally arrived, she was greeted by the sight of a modest yet sturdy house, nestled among a wide expanse of land. The ranch was smaller than the grand estates she had imagined in her dreams, but there was something comforting about it. The land was peaceful, untouched by the worries of the world. Clara felt a sense of calm settle over her as she stepped down from the wagon. She could already feel the difference in the air, the freedom, the quiet beauty of the open spaces. James came out to greet her, just as his letter had promised. He was a tall man with kind eyes and a strong build, his hands rough from years of working the land. Clara's heart skipped a beat as he smiled and extended his hand to her. His presence was warm, and there was no sign of the arrogance that so many others had carried. He was simply a man who was eager to meet the woman who might be his partner in life. "Clara," he said softly, his voice deep and calm, "it's good to finally meet you." She shook his hand, feeling the strength of his grip, and smiled back. "It's good to be here, James," she replied, her voice trembling slightly with excitement. James led her into the house where the warmth of a fire filled the room. It was simple, yet cozy, with wooden floors and a fireplace that crackled gently. Clara felt a sense of comfort in the space, and for the first time in a long time she could imagine herself living here. It wasn't grand, but it was home. It was a place where she could build a life, side by side with someone who would appreciate the little things, someone who saw the value in hard work and love. They spent the evening talking about their lives, their pasts, and their dreams. Clara learned more about James, how he had grown up on the ranch, how his parents had passed away, and how he had taken over the responsibility of running the land. He wasn't wealthy, but he had a quiet pride in what he had built. He wasn't interested in fortune or fame. He just wanted to live a life that had meaning. "I've been looking for someone to share this with," James told her as they sat by the fire. "Not just a wife, but a partner. Someone who understands what it means to work for something and to build a life from the ground up. I know it's not always easy, but it's real." Clara's heart swelled with emotion. She had never heard anyone speak like this before. She had always known that life was about more than just money or status, but to hear James put it into words made her feel understood in a way she hadn't known was possible. As the night wore on, Clara felt herself growing more comfortable with James. There were no grand gestures, no promises of riches or luxury, just the simple, honest truth of two people trying to make a life together. She realized that this was exactly what she had been searching for all along. Someone who could see her for who she truly was, not for the circumstances of her birth, but for the person she had become. But even as Clara felt a growing connection to James, a part of her couldn't shake the thought of Harold. She wondered if he would ever regret turning her away. Would he ever think about her again? Would he wonder what might have happened if he had accepted her for who she was instead of rejecting her because she wasn't wealthy enough? Clara pushed those thoughts aside. She couldn't afford to look back anymore. The past was behind her, and the future was right in front of her. She had made the decision to come here to meet James, and now she had to trust in that choice. James showed her around the ranch the next morning. The land stretched out before her in a way that was both beautiful and humbling. There were fields of crops, cattle grazing lazily in the distance, and a few sturdy barns where tools and hay were stored. It was a hard life, but it was a life that had purpose. Clara could see how much James cared for the land, how he worked tirelessly to take care of it. She admired that, and she knew that she could be a part of this life too. By the end of the day, Clara felt like she had found the place where she belonged. There was no grand promise of wealth or luxury, but there was something more important. There was the promise of a life built on love, respect, and shared purpose. Clara had come to James with the hope of a new beginning, and in the quiet of the ranch, surrounded by the land he loved, she realized that this might be the start of something real, something that would last. But as she lay in bed that night, her thoughts drifted again to Harold. She couldn't help but wonder how her life might have turned out if she had stayed in her small town, if she had never dared to dream of something more. But with each passing day, her connection to James grew stronger, and Clara knew deep down that this was where she was meant to be. The days after Harold's rejection felt like a heavy weight on Clara's shoulders. It was hard to shake the sting of his words, and even though she tried to put it behind her, there was always a lingering sadness in her heart. She spent most of her days working in the fields, helping her family with whatever they needed, but her mind kept wandering back to that letter. It felt like a door had been slammed in her face, and no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't quite close it behind her. The quiet days in her small village seemed to drag on. Clara often walked to the market, her eyes on the ground, feeling the disappointment of her dreams slipping further away. People in the village were kind, but their lives were simple and the world around them seemed small. She had hoped for more. She had dreamed of a love story where she would find happiness beyond the confines of her small life. Yet each time she thought about her future, it felt like that hope was slipping through her fingers. Her family, despite their best intentions, didn't know how to help her. Her mother tried to comfort her, offering soft words while her father stayed quiet, focusing on his work as usual. Clara appreciated their support, but deep inside, she couldn't ignore the growing emptiness. She wanted more than this, more than the daily struggle of survival, more than the familiar faces of the people who had always been there. She dreamed of a life where she didn't have to worry about whether there would be enough food on the table or whether the crops would survive another season. She kept writing to the other men who had contacted her through the mail-order bride service, though it was becoming harder to hold on to the hope she had once felt. One man who lived in a small town to the west had sent a letter that seemed kind enough. He had written about his work as a carpenter and how he needed someone to help him run a small house he had inherited from his parents. He seemed sincere, but there was something about his words that didn't sit right with Clara. She couldn't put her finger on it, but she didn't feel the spark of excitement that had come when she first corresponded with Harold. Days turned into weeks, and Clara's hope was beginning to wane. But one evening, just as she was about to give up, another letter arrived. The handwriting was different, unfamiliar, yet the neatness of it caught her attention. This was the letter that would change everything. The letter was from James. He was a rancher much like Harold, but his letter had a different tone altogether. James spoke of his ranch in a humble, honest way. He didn't boast about his wealth or the size of his land. Instead, he talked about his love for the land itself, the peacefulness of the open spaces, the satisfaction of working the earth, and the joy of building something with hard work and patience. There was no mention of money or status, just a simple, straightforward description of his life. In the letter, James mentioned how he had been searching for someone who would not only be his wife, but also a true partner in life. He wasn't looking for someone to fill a role in his household. He wanted someone to share in the struggles and the joys of building a life together. He wanted someone who could appreciate the beauty of the land and the peace that came with working hard. His words spoke to Clara in a way that nothing else had. They felt real, they felt kind, and they felt like they could offer the life she had been longing for. For the first time in a long while, Clara felt a spark of hope. She took a deep breath and reread his letter, each sentence filling her with a quiet sense of calm. Unlike Harold, James wasn't looking for someone to change her life for him. He wasn't searching for wealth or status. He was searching for a woman who would be his equal, someone who could work alongside him and build something meaningful. Clara felt a connection to James right away. His words were simple yet powerful. There was no pretension in his letter, no sense of superiority. He didn't judge her for being poor, nor did he expect her to be anything other than herself. He valued honesty, hard work, and companionship, qualities Clara had always believed in. She wasted no time writing back. She told James about her life, about her family, and about the dreams she still held close to her heart. She told him about the pain of rejection she had experienced, but she also spoke of her determination to keep moving forward. She knew it wasn't easy to find love, especially in a world that valued material wealth over the things that truly mattered. But she hoped that maybe, just maybe, James could see her for who she truly was, not as someone to be judged for her poverty, but as someone who could bring something of value to his life. As Clara waited for James's reply, her days were filled with a mixture of excitement and nervous anticipation. She had never felt this way before. With Harold, there had always been a sense of distance, a sense that he was looking for something more than what Clara could offer. But with James, it felt different. His sincerity was something she hadn't experienced before, and it made her heart beat a little faster each time she thought of him. But as Clara began to look forward to James's response, she couldn't help but think of Harold. She wondered what he was doing, where he was, and if he ever regretted his decision to turn her away. She remembered how confident he had seemed in his letters, how sure he was that she wasn't the right fit for him. Yet despite everything, Clara still couldn't fully shake the feeling that she might have missed something important. At the same time, Clara knew that she couldn't keep looking back. Harold's rejection had hurt her deeply, but life had a way of moving forward whether she was ready or not. She had to focus on what was in front of her now. The letter from James, the opportunity to build something new, to create a life with a man who saw her for who she really was. Days later, the reply came. James wrote back with kindness and warmth, his words confirming everything Clara had hoped for. He was genuinely interested in her, not just as a woman who could be his wife, but as a person who could share in the life he wanted to build. His letter was full of the same sincerity that had captured Clara's heart. He spoke of the ranch, of the work that needed to be done, and how he hoped that she would consider coming to meet him. Clara felt a rush of relief and excitement wash over her. For the first time in a long time, she felt like there was a future waiting for her, a future that didn't involve rejection or disappointment. James was someone who could see beyond the surface, beyond the circumstances of her birth. He saw her for who she was, and that was all she had ever wanted. The decision was clear. Clara would go to meet James. There was no more room for fear or doubt. She would take this chance, step into the unknown, and see where it led. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, Clara was ready to find out. Clara's heart beat fast as she sat at her small wooden table, the flickering candlelight casting long shadows across the room. She stared at the blank piece of paper in front of her, the quill resting gently in her hand. The air was thick with anticipation, and the faint sounds of the night outside, the wind rustling through the trees. The distant cry of an owl seemed to fade into silence as she tried to find the right words. This wasn't just any letter. It was a letter that could change her life. Clara had always dreamed of a better life, one far from the struggles and hardships that had marked her childhood. She had grown up in a tiny village where the people worked the land, day in and day out, barely scraping by. There was never enough to go around, and now at 22 years old, Clara felt like she had no future in her hometown. Her parents were kind people, but they were poor. There was little opportunity for someone like her. Clara had heard stories from other women in the village, stories of women who had found better lives far away, across the country, in the wide open spaces of the West. They had done it by becoming mail-order brides. The idea of finding love through letters had always seemed so distant, so unreal. But when Clara's options grew slimmer, and the weight of poverty threatened to crush her, she knew it was time to take a chance. Her heart had been full of hope when she signed up for the mail-order bride service. She spent the little money she had on the letters, filled with careful descriptions of herself, how she loved to work hard, how she dreamed of a future where she could raise a family in peace and happiness, far from the struggles of her past. She wasn't the wealthiest woman, but she had dreams, and those dreams were her only possessions. At first, Clara received several responses, each one different, but offering her a glimpse of the life she longed for. There were letters from men who seemed kind, some who seemed eager for a new beginning, and others who seemed too serious or too distant. Clara pored over each letter carefully, trying to sense which one might be the right fit for her. She could tell that many of them were sincere, but also that they wanted something she wasn't ready to give. Then there was Harold. His letter had been one of the first to arrive. Harold was a rancher, a man who worked the land in a place far from Clara's home. He spoke of his vast ranch, his strong sense of responsibility, and the kind of woman he was looking for, someone who could work hard beside him, someone who would be strong in the face of challenges, and someone who would understand the importance of family. Clara had been fascinated. She pictured the sprawling ranch in her mind, the wide-open fields and the sense of peace that came from living close to nature. His letter made her believe that she could find a place in the world, a place where she wouldn't have to worry about how to make ends meet every day. And though Harold hadn't promised her a life of luxury, she knew that his life could give her something her small town never could: a future. Their correspondence continued for several weeks. Harold asked questions about her family, her work, and what kind of woman she was. He spoke about his own life, how he had inherited the ranch from his father, how the work was tough but satisfying, and how he longed for a woman who could help him make his dream a reality. His letters weren't overly romantic, but there was something comforting about his words. Clara began to feel like she knew him, as though his voice was speaking directly to her heart. But as the weeks turned into months, things began to change. Clara had written back to Harold, sharing more about herself, her hopes, and how much she looked forward to meeting him. She even sent him a photograph of herself, a simple one taken by her mother, smiling softly for the camera. Then, one day, Clara received a letter from Harold that shattered her dreams. It wasn't long and it wasn't filled with explanations, but the words were clear. "I'm afraid I can't move forward with this. You are too poor for the kind of life I'm looking for. I need someone who can help me expand my ranch, someone who isn't tied down by circumstances." The words stung more than Clara had expected. She read them over and over, each time hoping they would change, but they never did. It was as though her dreams had been tossed aside, as easily as someone tossing away a letter they no longer wanted to read. Clara sat at her table, the letter trembling in her hands. For the first time in her life, she felt completely worthless. She wasn't rich, she didn't come from a family with land or money, but she had always believed that love was about more than wealth. She believed that she could build a life of happiness, a life of love, with someone who saw her for who she truly was. But Harold had rejected her for something she couldn't change: the circumstances of her birth. Tears welled up in her eyes, but Clara didn't let herself cry for long. She wiped her eyes, stood up, and walked to the small window in her room. The night was quiet, and the moonlight bathed the world in a soft, silvery glow. For a moment, Clara felt as though she might disappear into the night, just fade away into nothingness. But she refused to let the hurt control her. She had no time to feel sorry for herself. Life was tough, but Clara had always been tough too. She had worked hard to get by, and she would keep working hard. She would find another way, another chance. Maybe Harold wasn't the right man for her after all. If he couldn't see beyond her poverty, then maybe he wasn't the kind of man who would love her the way she deserved. The next day, Clara decided she would not give up. She wouldn't let this one rejection destroy her dreams. She took a deep breath and pulled out the pile of letters from the other men who had written to her. There had to be someone out there who saw her for who she truly was: a woman with hopes, dreams, and a heart full of love to give. But despite her decision to move forward, a part of her still couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal. She kept thinking about Harold, about the life she had imagined with him. His rejection had hurt more than she could have ever anticipated. It had been one of the most difficult moments of her life. Still, Clara knew one thing for sure: she wasn't going to give up. Not now, not ever. She would continue looking for love, for happiness, for a future where she could leave behind the struggles of her past. And if that meant moving forward without Harold, so be it. Clara was strong. She would find the life she dreamed of, no matter how long it took. And little did she know, there was someone out there who would see her for exactly who she was: a woman deserving of love, deserving of a life filled with happiness. But that journey, that new beginning, was still waiting for her just around the corner.